Hi, I'm Kevin,
And I'm Amanda.
and we are serving up.
All that jam. A lighthearted look at the weekend jam bands.
Where we break down the jam scene's biggest stories,
Talk new bands
upcoming tours,
and show reviews. A little laughing, some hot takes, and an always positive message for the community.
Week of April 2nd, 2023.
All right, welcome back. We are in the first week of April. No April Fool's jokes here. We're going to jump right in. We have an interview with Scott Sharrard from Little Feat coming up. They're starting a tour this week, and he talks to us a little bit about Little Feat and how he ended up in the band and his history. And then also we get, if you heard a couple weeks ago, we did a preview and he talked about Ahmad Aragon from Atlantic Records. And this is a continuation of that. Amanda jumps in with a question, and then we get deep into the state of the industry, and he really pulls no punches with that. We're also going to get into the top 3 stories of the week. But I saw some pictures on Facebook of you, Amanda. So let's talk about what's going on with that.
Well, Kevin, so I went out on Friday night, been looking forward to the show at Cervantes forever. And it was Dumpstafunk with an opener, Steely Dan. So kind of an interesting pairing there. But it's been on my calendar, on my radar, and had a really good time. A buddy of mine was filling in for the sax player. So that was also kind of an extra bonus.
And what's his name?
So that's Brad Walker was filling in for Alex, and crushed it. They have so much energy, and I hadn't seen them live in probably a year and a half at least. So just great. 2 bass guitars, you can't go wrong with that in my
Nick
world.
Daniels, right?
Yeah, and Tony.
Right.
Just, I mean, they came out on stage first and just did like a double bass solo for 4 or 5 minutes. Like, who
Nice.
does that? It was awesome.
And do I know Brad Walker?
So Brad is he's kind of like the everyman down in New Orleans on sax. He plays with
Okay.
everybody. New Orleans Suspects. So Jake.
That's where I thought I heard the name, and I didn't want to
Yes.
jump in with that. And
Yep.
I've always found it neat that they needed 2 bass players to do George Porter's parts. I'll just leave that there.
Sometimes things just are called for. You gotta go with it.
So you said to me, we always chat before, that you weren't that big on Steely Dead, but you appreciated where they came from. I'm huge on this. Someone pointed them out to me, and I've watched their YouTube videos, but I'm way a Steely Dan kid, and my history with the Dead. So
Yeah, I find it fascinating, the tribute bands that are able to do that. So Dead Floyd is one that I particularly love. They're based out here. Seen them a bunch of times, and I know there's plenty others.
the Pig
Um,
Talking Fish.
yes, exactly. And so it's always kind of interesting to just see people's takes on the music and how they put it together. And I think the more the merrier. It's always fun.
And lean into one band or 2 bands that much, or 3 with Pink Talking Fish, but just the fact that you're like, I'm buying into this. I'm gonna have to tell you
Totally.
my album theory soon. I was talking with DJ Williams about buying albums and streaming now, and
Mhm.
how like when I was 14, 13, and went and bought Flick of the Switch. I guess I was 12. I went bought ACDC's Flick of the Switch. I was all in on that, and I was not all in on Judas Priest Turbo.
Hmm.
And I it wasn't like I could go online and listen to both of them. It was either I caught a song on the radio, or I went out and actually bought the album,
Right.
kind of thing. And how you were so invested in a band, and it isn't like that anymore. 12 bands will drop an album on Friday. You can listen to a track or 2 of each, and
Yep.
it isn't like you spent your 10.99 to buy an ACDC album.
No, I know what you mean. So, I mean, and for me too, um, I have always been very big on concepts and what an album is going to try to deliver to you as a complete, like, holistic artifact. And so I enjoy listening front to back. it's not really for me about purchasing them so much. Maybe Bandcamp, definitely, but using that as kind of a jumping off point to do other kinds of support.
Let me ask you this. When you used to buy a 10-pack of tapes and you knew you were going over your buddy's house, did you how hard were the decisions? I want this, and this, and you're like, oh, I only got 10 tapes and that's 12.
Oh, that's a good question. It's so funny too because I don't have a ton of pictures, from high school days. They've been lost here and there, but I do have this one picture, and it's supposed to be a CD tower, but it just has cassettes in it, and then on the floor are boxes of unwrapped Maxell XL2s. And I totally know what you mean because they were precious, right? Even back then. You got to really think about it.
You did. It's crazy.
I
It's
love
crazy.
that though because I think we all had that mindset of yeah, I could tape over this, right? But the bottom line is, yeah, there's a finite amount of space, and I need to
So
be good about it.
so hard. One of the hardest things ever to do is to tape over something.
Hmm.
Because you're like, I hate this, but it might be the only copy.
I know, and I mean, I was lucky. I forget where I used to buy in bulk from, because I definitely would buy in bulk. But I always had like one or two jobs, and back in mid 90s or so, it was totally possible for me to work quite a bit, but have enough money to buy those.
Always overpaid. Sam Goody
Hmm.
or Best Buy, I guess later. Best Buy would run a special, and you just waited for the Maxell special because for like 3 weeks it'd be the TDK special,
Yeah,
and you're
no,
like,
we're passing on.
eh. And then you're like, Maxell, I got to get out the Best Buy this
Yeah,
week.
we're passing on those. I have a couple of those in my archive, and they stick out like sore thumbs.
Right, exactly. All right, so let's jump into the top 3 stories of the week, and then we'll hit the little feet interview.
The top 3 stories of the week.
Yeah, cool. Let's do it. Okay, so 3 stories. The first one I'm going to start out with is a little more serious. I think I'm going to kind of get into this one. And Kevin, I'm really curious to know if you have any thoughts on this. So I don't know if you or anyone else out there has been keeping track of Pras. No, Kevin, I need to make sure I'm saying this correctly. The guy from the Fugees. Is it Pras Michael? Do you know?
I think so, yes.
Okay, we're going to go with that. Okay.
We're going to
So
murder it.
yeah, that's good. So, Kevin, the first story that I'm going to go with for this week is a little bit more on the serious side, but it's getting some good attention right now. And so it's hip hop musician Pras Michael from the Fugees, who has just kind of taken this hard left turn in his life, right, over the last decade or so. Went from being a part of what is, I think, to this day, one of the most widely streamed albums of all time, to now basically having to kind of get himself some legal help because what's happened is he's been accused of pocketing $100 million in efforts to bring secret, illegal foreign influences on 2 different presidential administrations. So going back to Obama, also conspiracy, tampering with witnesses. I mean, it doesn't even seem like it could be true. But the Justice Department is putting him at the center of 2 completely separate streams of illegal contact. Let me try again. The Justice Department is putting him right in the middle of these 2 separate streams of illegal conduct that's tied to a billionaire from Asia. I'm going to stop there because I feel like I'm just saying words. But Kevin,
Rabbit hole.
it is. It is. Well, there's just so much. I mean, you could really go into this. But have you heard anything about this? Have you been keeping track?
I have not heard anything about this, and I'm waiting for the Amazon movie.
If there's not already one in progress, then that's just a
We're
travesty.
pitching it right here. We're
I
pitching it.
mean,
No,
they've got
that's
everything.
crazy. So what he basically was, he ended up with the businessman, is how I'm picturing this, and then he did that guy's bidding within the United States in order to affect elections and sent money. I'm sure all that money didn't go in his pocket, or did it? Or did he steal the money from the Asian guy that was supposed to be for the political stuff?
Yeah, so one of the things that allegedly happened, this is going all the way back to 2012 is that he may have arranged for what they call straw donors to make contributions to then President Obama's reelection campaign, only to reimburse them later with illegal foreign monies. So
Okay.
that's one thing. By 2017, this particular financer had kind of come under scrutiny and he needed help to influence government. And apparently, this person, the last name is Lowe, enlisted some fixers, including Michael, to go and do their bidding. And so there's a lot more to this, I think.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's just, how do you go from 1996, The Score, right? Seriously, an amazing triumph of an album. And I've listened to so many documentary podcasts just on that album and how it was made, to this. It just doesn't even seem real. So right now there's not a lot happening in terms of decisions, and it might be a while, but definitely something that I am super curious about now.
They all kind of disappeared. I mean, will.i.am, I guess, kicks around still, but Lauryn Hill, she went off the deep end a little bit too after that. Didn't like the Miseducation album she did, and then the whole tour was a disaster after that.
Yeah, I vaguely remember, but you would think, given, well, you know what? I shouldn't say that. I would think, given where they started, that this would be a totally different story. But then again, we know there are so many really talented musicians who, for one reason or another, have that huge moment, and then we just don't see them that much afterward.
Yep.
So it's completely different from Scott, who we're gonna be hearing from this week, right? Who's managed to take his career, and really the longevity of what he's done is incredible. On a much more serious note, though, I'm sure that a lot of people have seen this, but wanted to make sure to mention that Lotus has announced some benefit concerts for Chuck and Charlie Morris, as well as postponing their tour. So there's going to be 4 benefit concerts to honor Chuck and Charlie, and all of the proceeds, the shows will be in Denver and New York, will go toward the family. And so, that's going to be happening pretty soon. And then that April West Coast tour, of course, is postponed.
Postponed. Now is guests involved with these?
Yeah, so I can talk for sure about the Colorado shows in Denver. So that's going to be at the Fillmore, April 21st and 22nd. And both of those shows have just an extensive lineup of guests, former bandmates, collaborators. So a few of those would be Dave Watts from the Motet, Jeff Lloyd, Heavy Pets, my buddy Wilson from Giant Walking Robots. That's a band that my very good friend Dave runs. It's awesome to see that in there. And then, you've got Scotty from Ghostlight and others. So I think that it just goes to show there's a lot of people out there who really want to make these shows successful so that the family can get, as much support as possible.
Yeah, let's sell that out. We got a couple weeks. We got 3 weeks until that happens. So let's sell that out, and because I'm sure that he has another daughter and he has his wife who were left, and they're going to need a lot in order to get through this. I can't even imagine.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that we've seen and we've talked about, I think already, is just the community aspect and the reminder that everybody knows everybody. And I see that all the time. I know we do too when we're talking to people for this show, right? And they mention collaborators, people they
Everybody
work
knows
with.
Alan Evans.
Everybody. And I think that's something that's important to remember in the age of torches being passed,
Yes.
literally or figuratively. Everybody knows each other, and
Yeah.
so
I think
that's
we're
what
going to
it is.
find out down the road that they weren't torches, they were a bunch of Bic lighters.
Yeah, that we're almost out. So I think this is going to be maybe some closure of some kind also, even though it's not what anyone
Yeah.
wanted. I think these shows may also serve a couple of different purposes for everybody too. All right, so Kevin, the third story this week is about Floyd Fest. Have you ever been to Floyd Fest out in
I
Virginia?
I have not, but I have heard good things.
Yes, it is a great festival. I have not been there in probably 15-ish years. I know I went in '04, '05. I went for a bunch of years there. Amazing, really great location. I'm honestly not sure if that's still the same location, but that may not matter because just last week, the promoters of Floyd Fest put out some information that some new venue or land that they had planned to host is now most likely not going to be available. This is in Virginia, due to permitting complications. And that is a huge bummer because it's a well known festival. It brings in, I think, some really great bands. Um, this new venue, which I guess they were calling Festival Park, was going to make its debut at Floyd Fest, which is
Mm,
going to run July
and the
26th.
neighbors said, "Not in my backyard."
Yeah, I think that they're going to have to do some work here because if that's not viable, they're going to have to figure something out. And it's not easy if they're going to want to keep it in Virginia.
Mm,
I mean, I don't know how many options they would necessarily
yeah.
have. Um,
Lock in sight.
yeah. Now, there was an update that came out maybe late last week that said the 2024 Floyd Fest is set in stone. So maybe it really is just a matter of timing.
Who's
Um,
on the lineup? Do
yeah,
we know?
so this year, I think that they had pretty much solidified it. They had the Black Crows, My Morning Jacket, Goose was going to be there, Leftover Salmon, Maggie Rose, Circles Around the Sun, Eggy, Neighbor. So kind of getting that whole crowd
Yeah.
in there. Um, and so, that's going to be a big hit to them. But if they can play off of 24 being a sure thing, then hopefully people
Right.
will continue.
Yeah. Well, either way, you say it's a sure thing. So,
You got it, right? What are you going to say? We don't know.
so speaking of sure things, Scott Sharrard, we're going to get into this interview, and it's great in the beginning. He talks about he was going to sit in for 2 nights, and then Paul died, and they were like, he found out afterwards they kind of knew that he wasn't going to be back, so it was an audition, and he didn't even realize until after the show. But let's check this clip out, and we'll talk to you on the other side. Let's jump forward because you mentioned Little Feat, and we're here really to get into this. You joined Little Feat in 2019, so you're like, yeah, I'm in. This is great. Boom, quarantine. So, can you run through a little bit about joining the band and then the effects of going through COVID? How that did it help you? Did you get to learn the songs more? Kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, all great and very relevant questions to this whole origin story. I mean, I with Little Feat, the reason they called me for the gig is we had a lot of mutual friends, one of them being the Doobie Brothers, who I'd sat in with close to a dozen times because we were on all these double bill tours with Greg Allman, and those guys were really kind and took a shine to me. And Bill Payne was playing piano in the Doobie Brothers at that time. So that was going back to there. And then Little Feat's manager in 2019 actually looked, had all these people telling him and Bill that I'd be a good sub for Paul Barrere because Paul was ailing very badly. And the manager of Little Feat at the time happened to go on my website, and he saw all the times I was mentioning Little Feat in my bio on my website. I was also, there was a lot of kismet between how our cross paths, because there was all that. And then there was the fact that, I was actually supposed to be on all these, I won't go through all the names, but I was up for all these other gigs to be a sideman, some of which I turned down, some of which I didn't make the cut, that would have put me on the road at that time when they needed a sub. And they only needed a sub for 2 gigs. But I happened to be off and I happened to be home, and all those other paths were leading to nowhere. And the manager told Bill Payne, hey, do you remember Scott? And by the way, he said on his bio, Little Feat's one of his favorite bands. So Bill called me, explained to me what the task was. I told him how important the band was to me. I was delighted to get the call. I showed up at the first of 2 gigs to sub for Paul. And when the band showed up, I found out that Paul had actually passed away on the ride of the van from the hotel to the venue to play my first gig with the band. So I had about a half hour of actual rehearsal with the Little Feat, and then I played my first show with the Little Feat, where the first thing that happened is Bill Payne announced to the audience that Paul had passed away that afternoon. So that's about as much technical, physical pressure and karmic value as you can throw on a job. And as a lifelong fan, I have all that baggage I'm carrying. What the hell am I doing up here? But I got to the end of the gig, and it was one of those things where it was like a you're in the band moment at the end of the gig. It wasn't even a question.
Nailed it.
Do we look for anyone else? Like, could we have gotten a better sign that this is the guy? And then, of course, I did a good enough job on that gig that they were like, this is the guy. So that's how that happened. That was November of 2019. As you mentioned, it was 2019. Then there was a long break for the holidays that had already been scheduled for the band way before I was in the mix. And February of 2020, we went to Jamaica for a week, and I played a few shows with the band and got the high five one more time. And then it was like, you're officially in the band. And now we're going to start scheduling tours. And then COVID hit, of course, in March. And then I got a year off with my family, and I ended up starting this Zoom online teaching program where by April of 2020, I was teaching 20 or 30 hours every week. I did one solo concert from Woodstock, New York, where we would hold up in a rented house every month, and eventually every week, where I would do an album front to back as a solo performance.
Is this on YouTube or somewhere? Can we find it?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. It was called I did it with a friend of mine, Chris Pizzolo, who's a great video guy and publicist and label owner now in New York City. We called it the Scott Sharrard's American Songbook Live, and we did that. And then I was teaching American roots music history, songwriting, guitar, vocals to people all over the world. And I was spending I had an amazing time with my little kids. They were I guess they were 3 and 9 at the time, or 3 and 8 at the time. And I spent all my time studying Lowell George's rig, Paul Barrere's rig, how they played. Chris Caffiero turned me on to all these amazing bootlegs of Little Feat that I had never been aware of that were all on YouTube. And Tony Leone, who joined the band during the pandemic on drums, is an old friend of mine. He was doing the same thing, and we were sharing getting all these old arrangements back in the mix. We did some recording with the band. We did a version of Long Distance Love with Amy Helm. We did a version of Bill Payne's song, All Boats Rise. Those came out. So we were doing pandemic distance recording with Little Feat. My buddy Charlie Martinez, who I've been producing and engineering with for 20 years, came in the fold, and now he's front of house and also producer and engineer for the band. So we made all these changes and did all this output during the pandemic year off. And then, of course, we came back in November of 2021, and Charlie came in on front of house. Tony came in on drums. My longtime road manager, Michael LeBeau, came in as a drum tech. There was this kind of New York invasion of Little Feat that kind of slowly bubbled in. And then, of course, the entire time I was working with Greg Allman for, as you said, almost a decade. Our road manager was Vid Sutherland, and he came in as the road manager. So it became this whole one big family mashup of sort of Little Feat, Greg Allman band, my band. It all kind of coalesced.
So Kevin, as you mentioned earlier, this whole conversation, I felt like, first of all, very full of energy. And one of the things that we also talked about was just the industry as a whole. And I want to get into that a little bit. But before I do, this is a reminder to everybody out there to like, follow, subscribe, and review us if you can. We would really appreciate that. We're on social media at All That Jam Pod, and then allthatjampod.com. You can find us anywhere that podcasts are available. And we would really love your support and to hear what you think about what we're doing. This whole concept of, being a successful musician requiring kind of a traditional record label contract deal, this was something that we talked with Scott about, because I had read that he had gotten some advice from the legendary Ahmet Ertegun. And so I asked him about that, and he had a lot to say. So let's go ahead and check that out.
How do you navigate that? Is it things like sync licensing?
Well, you're going back to, you asked, I was glad you asked about the conversation with Ahmet. And he was, again, I think our scene in New York, I don't mean just the Chesterfields, but that whole ecosystem of musicians, we were 20 years ahead of our time. Some of us successful, most of us not. Ahmet sitting in his office, a corner office at the old Time Warner Center, next to Radio City Music Hall, where I'd sit and look out at the panorama of New York, 21-year-old kid from the fucking Midwest. I sucked in every word he said. And he saw this whole thing coming, because he said, the first bad sign is that these guys don't have relationships with any of you. The next bad sign is going to be they're going to sell the farm. And if, back then he would say, the technology comes along, trust me, they're going to sell you all down the river. So get your entire trick bag of skills together. And at the time he was telling me, you're a good enough singer and guitar player that if it was the 70s, I would sign you to a 5-album deal. But he's like, I would put you with, he goes, if I could put you with anyone now, I'd put you with Tommy LaPuma, and I'd have you make some blues records where you're like the blues Frank Sinatra. I tried to follow that breadcrumb trail he left me, and I didn't want to get in a suit and do the whole thing. And of course, then 3 years later, there was Peter Cincotti, and eventually there was Michael Bublé. And I was in an early set of that pipeline that was like, what are we going to do with people who are musicians? And I went the other way, because I didn't just want to be Tom Waits or Jimi Hendrix or Stevie Wonder or Royal George. I wanted to be all of them. I didn't want to be bagged into anything. So I ran off in my own direction, and Ahmet's advice was, if you're going to do that, make sure you can play, write, co-write, produce, sing, teach, tour, record, do it all on your own. He's like, own the farm. He's like, have your own label, have your own publishing, have your own. And he introduced me to a very influential music lawyer who I'm actually going to see again in a week, who I haven't seen since before the pandemic, Peter Thal, who's been this unbelievable mentor and guide for me throughout my career. And Peter always encouraged this as well, and has helped to have my back through every iteration I've been through. So I credit Ahmet for everything in terms of helping me to survive. But stage one was, don't trust any of these people, because they are going to fuck you. And of course, what did they end up doing? Oh, they didn't just fuck me. They fucked everybody. And the strategy was, so you have a certain strata. So you have everyone from Rihanna and Beyonce, and then you have Led Zeppelin and the Beatles. Now, you remember when streaming first came along, right? Everybody under that strata, okay? The record labels basically, from what I understand, and this is hearsay, but we'll see if this is true or not. But it's a folklore that would make a lot of sense to me if this is the way it happened. From what I understand, through a series of meetings and interactions, as the streaming started to really pick up steam and the lawsuits against Napster went bad, and everything they tried to fight to keep physical product wasn't working, and they kept signing worse and worse photocopies of Britney Spears and NSYNC, and the most vapid act they could find to try to match the last one. Listeners got angry. Fans got angry. They said, you signed bullshit. You're not propping up the right artists. Your ecosystem sucks. You're suing us for stealing music. You don't. And then they're like, no, we don't want to work with Apple on their streaming platform. No, we don't want to do this. No, we don't want to do that. And then, of course, as the technology caught up and the numbers started to suffer, they said, well, wait a second. You guys are going to win. This is in the back room. What can we do to survive? And people like Spotify said, all right, look, if you fuck everybody on their royalties, we'll give you stock. And then, And when it came to Rihanna and the Beatles and anybody who had the best lawyer and manager and maybe their own label, or maybe had all the rights to their songs or whatever it was, when they came to that meeting table, it's, guys, what can we do to remember how it was all this? When are the Beatles or the Led Zeppelin going to come on? I don't know this for a fact, but my suspicion, let me throw this suspicion out there, is one of the many lawyers and one of the many handlers of this catalog and those streaming platforms got together and said, look, you give us some stock, we'll give you the fucking catalog. Because what's worth more, right? Well, guess what? When every artist becomes an island, and SAG-AFTRA can tell you about this. Ask any actor or any stagehand about this. When every individual becomes an island, everyone negotiates their own deal. You're going to fuck the majority. And that's exactly what happened. Everyone negotiated their own deal around stock and around backroom deals at the top 1%. Look at our country. This is capitalism on steroids 101. Everyone else was unorganized. So when people crow on and on about this, as they do, and artists have a right to complain, but when the AFM is not involved at all in anything that makes real money, right? Yeah, you go on Letterman, they're gonna work with you. You go on Broadway, they're gonna work with you. But when you get a hit song, they're nowhere to be found. For the people who play on it, for the producers, for the writers, same thing with our collections agencies. So there's a lot to unpack in this space. That's my anecdotal experience, but there's a hell of a lot to improve. And I'm someone who's for collective bargaining, and I think that we were atom bombed as creatives, and to come back from that, I mean, it's literally like, we're at the point in the zombie film where we're just walking out of the fallout shelters and going through the irradiated, areas, and we're like starting to rebuild on land and breathe oxygen again. But it's going to be a long time before we're back to a cohesive society as a creative entity.
It's crazy. It really having to. I can't imagine having to be a musician these days. It's got to be so hard, and just so much that we've heard from people about how COVID sucked for the world, but it gave them a chance in a long time to get off the road. They weren't making money, but that has to be such a grind. I mean, I know you've been on the road before, and I've run around following bands for years, and after 4 or 5 days, I'm like, all right, I'm done with this.
Yeah, it is a grind. I think for some people it's perfect, and that's why sometimes I think people really find the lifestyle that works for them. What was interesting about the whole conversation that Scott shared about the record deal, I know I've mentioned this before, but had read Springsteen's autobiography. He also had gotten some very early career advice from Ahmet Ertegun, but in kind of a different way. And so it kind of makes me realize that I think a lot of this is just luck and timing. If you're in the right place, the right time, you're not willing to kind of give up on that idea or dream, it could happen. But man, just being able to have a career that has spanned that much time, to me is such an accomplishment.
Yeah, and I mean, he's just Greg Allman, and now Little Feat. He's just fantastic, and there's some stuff that you'll hear down the line in the future. He's worked on the new Walker Texas Ranger. He does the soundtrack for that. I mean, just some really interesting stuff there. So you got anything else going on this week, or what's?
There's tons of music coming out here. This weekend coming up, I think if I wanted to be, I could be quadruple booked on Saturday. Nice. Probably actually going to go see Giant Walking Robots, maybe do merch for them. Mention Wilson a couple minutes ago as being part of that Denver-based show to support Chuck's family. They're playing out here. Perpetual Groove is out here. I mean, there's just a lot happening. So really have to figure out figure out the dance card, because from now until the end of the summer, it's just nonstop. Um, and so one of the things that I think, Kevin, would be fun to do, just trying to get some more, listeners involved. Kind of love to see what people are digging on for their local scene. So I'm going to put some questions out there, see what they're liking, venues that they're into, and maybe help build a little bit of a calendar or something. So just something to
Nice.
think about.
Nice. I
Yeah.
get to see Bikini Kill on Thursday with my daughter. This will be the fourth time it was rebooked from 2020.
Oh,
Twice they got COVID after 2020, and so they've moved it, and hopefully Thursday will be there. And then Friday, I think I'm going to go see Aqueous because they're on
nice.
their final. It might be one of the last shows, like one of the
Yeah.
last two or three. I don't know if they said they were retiring or ending, but either way, I think I got to go check that out. And yeah, make sure when you get on social media, look for us so you can contribute to this. We want to know about these local venues and these local bands. This coming week, we have our up and coming series. On Tuesday, it's Yam Yam. Wednesday, Air Show. Thursday, Dance Land. And Friday, Natalie Brooke. And then on Saturday, we have a preview coming out of our 17th episode with Alan Evans from Soul Live. And he, you might have heard, we did a little thing about him playing with Medeski, Martin, and Wood, and him laughing about how they just went into a space thing in the middle of a funk jam and the crowd, watching the crowd. But yeah, that's going to be fascinating too. And Amanda, until next week, stay beautiful, but don't stay underground too long. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm going to try.
Thank you.